Today, John Loring presents Embracing Paradox, Steinbeck's Cannery Row at 75. Along with being grandpa to Dylan and Bella, John Loring is a retired architect and teacher. Among his academic achievements is a doctorate in religious studies and the humanities. He is published in the academic journal Steinbeck Review. And along with being a great fan of Laurel and Hardy, he takes to heart Oscar Wilde's comment that life is too important to take seriously. He would also like you to know that if he had been a character at the end of Ray Bradbury's book, Fahrenheit 451, the story where all the books are burned, and if he had to be part of the secret renegade community in the book, where books are memorized for posterity, the book he would have chosen to memorize is Cannery Row. Welcome, John.
Well, good morning to you all, and good afternoon, in fact, to our friends in New York. Are we ready? Okay. Once upon a time, not far from here, there was a magical realm inhabited by some rather special people. Over time, the place slipped into the shadows, and only remnants of it remain today. The place was Cannery Row in Monterey, California, in the early 1930s. Fortunately for us, in 1945, after having written his masterpiece, The Grapes of Wrath, and after serving time as a reporter in Europe during World War II, John Steinbeck returned to Monterey, and perhaps in an effort at personal therapy, sought to recover that magical time that was Cannery Row. In not quite 200 pages, there is so much. And for today, I would like to focus on one area, and that is Steinbeck's embrace of paradox. For those of you who have not read it, the book centers around the character Doc, a marine biologist who owns a small lab on the waterfront of Cannery Row, and Mac, the leader of a small, motley group of bums who live just above the row. The closest thing to a plot is how Mac and the boys attempt to give a surprise party for Doc. Otherwise, there is no plot, only simple vignettes, often randomly presented, offering insights into the joys and conflicts of everyday life. Cannery Row is probably Steinbeck's funniest book. There are scenes where you will laugh your tail off. And yet, what might be called the inciting incident of the book is a suicide, the first of 3 or 4 suicides that occur in the book. The archetypal masks of Greek theater, one representing comedy and the other tragedy, are held together by Steinbeck paradoxically. Paradox is one of the key aspects of the book. And this is the ability to hold together 2 conflicting, seemingly mutually exclusive ideas or experiences at the same time. Paradox. Let me give you a simple example. I was talking with a young woman recently who had lost her teenage son. A year and a half out from his death, she is in deep grief. But at one point, she said that she was glad he was not alive at this time of having to deal with the great pandemic. Isn't that terrible, she said. How can I grieve his loss and yet be grateful that he is not here? Being able to hold on to both of these conflicting emotions is a mark of wisdom, a paradox. A more common experience may involve the death of an elderly person who is suffering, where there is both sadness and gladness for the passing, a paradox. This past summer, when Michael Esselin spoke here, he quoted Joseph Campbell, who himself was a part of the Cannery Row community in the early 1930s and a close friend of Steinbeck. Campbell said, "We must participate with joy in the sorrows of the world," a paradox. No doubt you can think of some examples from your own life. When I mentioned to a friend what I was doing this morning, he said, I've got this friend. He's a great guy. He's a good person. He does wonderful things, and yet his politics absolutely suck. And that, to me, he said, is a paradox. Time after time in this book, Steinbeck embraces paradox. Take the opening paragraph, for example. How can the same people be both whores, pimps, gamblers, and sons of bitches, and saints and angels and martyrs and holy men? Take the simple plot. When Mac and the boys try and carefully plan to give Doc a surprise party, it's a disaster. Then when they don't even bother, a wildly successful party just sort of happens. Mac himself is a paradox. He is perfectly content because he does not work for contentment. Throughout the row, paradoxes abound. Nobody on the row believes in superstitions, but everyone acts like they're real. The name of the local whorehouse is the Bear Flag Restaurant. Henri the painter is building a boat, but he never plans to launch it. Doc, one of our two main characters, craves a beer milkshake. And by the way, Doc also befriends everyone on the row, but is perhaps the most lonely. One woman who lives in a discarded industrial boiler with her husband puts up curtains, even though there are no windows. One character, a young abused boy named Frankie, is basically adopted by Doc to be cared for. But it is Frankie's love for Doc that turns out to be his undoing. And then Cannery Row overall does not become itself until after it closes down for the day. Throughout the book, as I mentioned, Steinbeck interweaves little vignettes involving life and death. Both are embraced. Joy and sorrow, comedy and tragedy. And of course, for all of us, this can be a great paradox, holding life and death together. Now, parenthetically, one of my best friends said, don't do this paragraph, but I'm going to do it anyway. Parenthetically, Steinbeck deals with the ultimate paradox of all, which I will mention briefly. Steinbeck and Ed Ricketts, the actual marine biologist on whom the character Doc is based, closely followed the scientific thinking of their day. With a careful reading of the book, you can see that in simple, everyday language, Steinbeck is seeking to develop a unified field theory, the grand paradox, incorporating both Einstein's theory of relativity and quantum physics, something that even today scientists are struggling to achieve, believe it or not. But we'll have to save this for a later discussion, and I mentioned it only to suggest the depth of the ideas that make up this remarkable little book. We can talk about this one a little bit more after the service if you wish. So let's get back to our more basic everyday experience. The ability to embrace the paradoxes of life are at the core of the book. Paradoxes have a long tradition in storytelling and in religions as well. In Zen Buddhism, for example, one path to enlightenment is through a paradoxical question, the koan. For example, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Taoism, of course, has a holistic approach to yin and yang, light and dark, good and evil, negative and positive. Jesus said, "Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet even Solomon, in all his glory, was not arrayed like one of these." And then there's that thing about loving your enemies. Paradoxes are part of life. Early on in the book, after the first disastrous party that destroys most of Doc's marine biology laboratory, Doc is absolutely enraged. Yet after some time, he is able to enlarge his vision to the point where he can forgive Mac and basically embrace the paradox, acknowledging the damage, the anger, the rage, and allowing for forgiveness. Forgiveness can be a tough one, especially when one has felt personally violated. How can one forgive? It can seem impossible. But think of those situations where even victims of violent crimes have somehow taken on such a large view of a situation that they can forgive their perpetrators. It is possible, and for Steinbeck, there is a place for enlarging one's vision and holding the paradoxes that come along in life. This can be taken a little further. Towards the end of the book, Steinbeck tells the story of a handsome young gopher who finds the perfect vacant lot on the row. He digs the perfect hole, stocks it well with food, and waits for a mate. He has done everything he can, but a mate never comes. And so this handsome young gopher decides he must relocate to a less desirable, more dangerous place, a place where cats hang out, a place where people set traps, and there he waits for his mate. He has done everything he could have done, and he must accept and resign himself to the situation. In Japanese culture, this is called taikan. It's a concept that means well-contented, accepting everything as it is, both success and failure, situations where there are no good answers. Tychon may seem like a negative thing, but paradoxically, it is regarded as positive. And it's a great paradox: resignation and acceptance of what is, and contentment. So, being able to enlarge one's view so as to hold a paradox, especially in difficult situations, is a gift. And time after time in this beautiful little book of Cannery Row, paradox after paradox, this is a message that comes through clearly. And on the 75th anniversary of its publication, it's something we can all take to heart. As Friedrich Dürrenmatt was quoted as saying in our first reading today, whoever is faced with the paradoxical exposes oneself to reality. So I want to leave it there for now. If you have comments, questions, criticisms, whatever, we'll take care of those right after the service. Thank you.